Sorry about
This is a walkthrough of Krein, the DLC mod for Skyrim, with commentary.
Sure.
I know some people are gonna be like, no, you can't just comment on a video, I don't want commentary. No! You will live in the pod, and you will listen to my commentary. Otherwise, I have a forehead solution. Just play the mod. Just play the mod, bro. If you wanna listen to the dialogue and everything. Now, I will be using a very low quality mic as always to comment on this video. But this mic is sitting on a Neumann TLM 102 shock mount, even though it doesn't fit in it. So it does still qualify as a fancy setup. Also, I'm playing on the original Skyrim. Yes, old Rim. Because I live under a rock, and living under a Dwayne Johnson is actually pretty good. You don't have to worry about fads or trends. You can play ancient games and pretend they're still relevant, because most new games are probably bad anyway. But interestingly, other than the technical fixes, Skyrim Special Edition isn't really much better visually. There are some visual distinctions, but they're not clear-cut. There are some cases where you can see there is a bit of polish on Special Edition, but overall, not really. Like, for example, for some reason they thought making the 20s Breton/Imperial male face, which is like, I think you can pick very young or something, or young as the face type, and that's like 20-year-old to 30-year-old, and they made it look higher definition, like a higher definition 40-year-old face. And that's their way of making things look better, is to make the 20-year-old male face look like a 40-year-old. I don't know. And the face details are better for everyone except Khajiit, which is ridiculous. The original Khajiit face textures are crazy low quality, and the SSC version is basically the same. So, please download a face mod for Khajiit faces if you have not already. That's basically an obligation. And it's been like that since the original Skyrim. I think I've been using the same mod for it, and then just copied it over to SSC for like a while too. A lot of visuals are actually slightly worse in SSE, particularly on 4K custom textures with multiple layers, other than normal or diffuse/color maps, except for landscape textures, which are mostly better for the most part. There's a new material property, I think. And that's just like moving meshes over from old Rim to SSE, so it seems that to make them look better in SSE you'd have to do some additional adjustments, and it's like you'd have to do that for every mesh, which is not going to happen for anybody. So I'm not going to do that, and nobody else is probably going to do that. But at the same time, there are things that are like clearly not good. Lazy or strange. Like, frankly, putting lens flares on everything that shines is just goofy. The visual bloom from shadow boundaries is a hit or miss, and some of the special effects that were changed are kind of weird. They're more glaring, like the Ashman explosion, which is just a weird thing to change. Like, of all things, that not every special effect was changed, so why would you change these? They end up being visually excessive, like it's just a big shiny colored ball of gas instead of what it was before, which I thought was a little bit more subtle and not as visually offensive. Of course, that's just one example. There's like a handful of them. I don't know why they decided to change that in specific, though. Also, Creation Kit is now less stable and slower, which is a feature, not a bug, as Todd Howard would say. What else? We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Genereth has been too kind. I expected you two to be icicles by now.
Master Horace, this is the Dragon Ball.
Splendid! I was so eager for your help that Giles risked the task of travel merely to beckon you.
Master Horace is the greatest mage I've ever known. I'm sure you'll become friends in no time.
Well then, we've little time for rigmarole. Let's be on our way. The road ahead is not a kind one, but we'll make do. Our travel will be easier in the valley.
Now, I'm not going to go through the whole mod, actually, because there's like 30 quests total. And there's a huge amount of places in general. So I'll just be doing the main campaign, and even then I'm pretty much doing like the bare minimum content. I still have hours of gameplay of it. Also, I skipped a large chunk of going from Skyrim to Silvermorn because that's too much time. Another thing is that I'm doing this on super old saves where my characters are pretty badly geared. So there's no avoiding that. But that's because all my other saves have mods in them. And these are the only two without. And actually one of them is from Xbox. Because that's how old I have to reach for something to not have a mod. I don't even have an Xbox anymore. And I have not had one for like a while. But the good thing is that we'll be gearing a little bit along the way.
That's about as much help as we need here.
So now we can get to this subject matter. There are a dozen or so puzzles throughout the main campaign. I feel like some of them have a Half-Life style of interaction. Like when I was 5 playing Half-Life in like the early 2000s, I vaguely remember being stuck in certain places like Chapter 8. Which I don't remember the name of the chapter, but I do remember the name of the map, because in that chapter, which is the data lab, or whatever it's called, where you have everything shut down, you have to open it. I don't remember what that's called. You have to block the protection wall where there's the lasers to break the other wall with the main laser. You have to activate the laser, but that's 2 degrees of freedom, and it's a basic puzzle where the player has to figure out, oh, there's a box here that I use. And I guess a 5-year-old wouldn't exactly figure that out immediately. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the player is contained in that area, and it's not like they have to wander around the whole map to figure it out. You just kind of stay in that area. There's a box there. Oh, it's basically the presentation is there. Everything's there. So it's not the same thing entirely. Like they don't have to go anywhere else to figure out how to adjust the parameters of the puzzle.
Best stay close. There's no telling some protection spells were cast upon.
What's happening?
Yorn!
The first puzzle is pretty simple. You just figure out off the notes which of the combinations give you a different result. And because there are only 2 degrees of freedom, if you're really desperate, you can just try out all combinations and you finish fine. Lots of references to Half-Life in this mod, by the way, I think. We'll see. So,
This looks familiar. I left my journal around here somewhere. Take a look at these notes. This looks to cipher of some sort. See if you can decrypt this code. That should open the doors.
What's happening?
Strange. Color me mad, but I'd bet you a few septims this isn't actually a wall. It's a door. And surely there's a way
another puzzle, but more
Check the
painful,
board. See if you
is,
can find something that shows us the way
and
through.
this is the last one I think, or one of them. Certainly the last mandatory one where you have to read anything to get an intuition, but maybe not. I guess you'd have to read.
I'm not sure what this is, but it might have
Well, if
something
I
to do with
had
the castle's
stacks of
defenses.
iron
It looks useful.
and 2
something
plates,
the
I don't
matter?
know, maybe I'd figure it out eventually without notes. But anyway, the simplest thing is just to try a different number of ingots from 1 onward on each plate until you find the right count, which is pretty simple. The puzzles do seem to get a little bit more complicated, more and more complicated as you progress, but they're not really the center of the gameplay, so it's often functionally present to affect the flux where there otherwise would be just non-stop movement and action.
Let's move along.
But now we're on to something different. Krein has over a dozen bosses, and this is the first one. And here the boss, relatively simple. The boss book is provided, which sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to find it. Sometimes exploration is rewarded in that, to some degree. So this thing describes the abilities, and I'll describe in this case what's given to you in the book. Magic is pretty OP versus melee in Skyrim in general, so this will be a pro magic fight, kind of an anti melee fight, and that's just the case in general. I think like throughout any vanilla or not kind of combat, it's just melee is just kind of, I mean, you can make it OP, sure, I guess, but it's just more awkward versus being able to move around with ridiculous spells. And actually, now that I think about this, the fireball is kind of OP when you have all the traits maxed out. The fireball is so cheap, but it does, but you can do it so often and it has enough damage. It's like you don't even need the fireball. Anyway. So, like I said, this is a ranged enemy that's mainly anti-melee. And like I said, in Skyrim, it's difficult to be anti-magic and melee friendly in general, because magic, like I said, kind of OP. So there's ways around this. It's not, I mean, I guess it's not that anti-melee. It's kind of a simple boss, but the boss has two mechanics. Sometimes when he takes damage, he'll go to the center and cast a massive AoE. Storm. And you have to avoid that, and the way you avoid is by hiding behind one of the pillars. For melee, if you're not spamming him with shots, you'll be good for the most part. If you just to get ready for the AoE, but if you are, then he'll blind you every so often. And that, I think that's pretty much it. So this is an introductory boss, clearly, to get players to pay attention to mechanics. The AoE may be a little too often, but you have two allies who marginally assist. So it's a pretty straightforward boss. Like, you should be done with this, no problems. This next one is about timing. There are 3 buttons, and upon pressing one, a ticking sound will last for a variable amount of time. So you have 3 degrees of freedom here, because order and activity don't matter. It doesn't make sense to hit them all at the same time, because that doesn't do anything. So making them finish all at the same time is pretty much the next option, I would think. Maybe a little bit more mysterious, but it doesn't take too long to figure out. So now we're in the Hailstrom chapter, I guess I can call it a chapter, which is clearly a leap away from reality and into a dream world. The architecture is very distinct and abstract, but not simplistic. The kind of feel around this is surrealism in space. Very heavy on cold colors. Everything is mostly in blues except for the glow of the planet below, which doesn't really have a warm feel to it. The eerie yellow color doesn't feel warm for some reason, which adds to the visual feel overall. And also that brightens up everything from below, which is a very different, very rare approach to lighting, since you don't really see light cast from directly below from the ground. And there's also a bit of a hint of Lovecraftian concepts there with the tentacles, which are a common motif throughout these particular worlds. There's also distinction, a sharp contrast with the usage of very dark and very bright textures. With, I don't know what kind of stone that would be, but a dark stone along limestone, which is also a relatively common motif here. Now, we're on to the second boss, Void Reaver, with almost no breaks in between, so this whole part is juicy with content. This boss is pretty simple, actually. There are 2 ads that spawn non-stop at the doors. And all you have to do is take down the boss, no holds barred. The catch is that the cold fireballs he throws have huge damage. So a single direct hit typically will destroy you. But there are 2 thin pillars at either side that you can use to LOS him. And if you're not a magic-based build, that's probably the way to go. If you are a magic-based build, it's a little bit easier to move around. And what I did is calculate where the fireball will hit so I can avoid it using the pillars. So this is another boss where magic is easier to use. And I'm only keeping the clip where I actually win because there's no point in putting the other ones there. And I also will see if I can use magic builds as the clip where it's anti-magic and then melee builds where it's anti-melee. Which one's harder, in other words. I'll show the one where it's more difficult. Generally, there is like an edge. You have an advantage if you're one build or the other overall. I think that's just true in general, though. But maybe someone else has a different build and different idea, different approach, different strategy for these things. Okay, so here we're on to Zuran, who is a bit more involved than the previous 2 bosses. But the interesting part about this is that you don't have to defeat him. Rather, if you do overcome his challenge, you're given a choice between 2 paths forward. If you lose to him, you're not killed, you're just forced out of the dream world. And he has 3 mechanics. The first one is the 2 sword strikes. So everything on the eyeball side of the sword is going to get damaged. So if you're on the same side that the eyeball is looking, you will get damaged. Meaning that you have to go on the other side, opposite side, to avoid that damage. And if you're closer to the sword, it does more damage, clearly. You want to avoid the explosion, so you kind of want to avoid being near him in general. So if he's hitting with the right sword like he's doing, then you have to go all the way to his right, and vice versa. Another thing is he'll spawn a floating portal that will follow you and cast magic if you're too close. You have to avoid that as well. That's pretty simple, as long as you keep in mind that you're paying attention to the magic that's the magic sword attacks that are happening. And then finally, he's going to spawn a void demon that is kind of has a few mechanics on its own. So he's semi-invisible. He'll turn invisible for a little bit. He has a fireball. He has an AoE stomp. And he does hit pretty hard. So you kind of just want to avoid him and strike when you can. If you're a rogue-ish build that you use invisibility a lot, then he's going to cast the floating portal that's going to attack you even more often. So you want to keep at the edge for that. Also, he's going to spit fireballs if you're too close to the center. If he uses one sword, it's probably a good idea to move to the other side, because he's unlikely to use that sword multiple times, although maybe that doesn't work quite well here as it should, because Skyrim's RNG is weird. But generally, like, if he uses the same sword twice, next time it's going to be the other one.
I will give you the opportunity to seek it out. Alas, it seems I have overstayed my welcome. Nonetheless, I will speak your first command. Turn and leave. With my last breath, I open a portal to your world.
Do you seek to interrupt our colleague?
Same thing with the auditory atmosphere. The music is abstract, and it has, and as well as the subtle sound environment has kind of an abstract, mysterious feel about it. Not creepy per se. I guess eerie is the right word here.
Will you choose to leave us to our devices? Or will you continue to meddle in matters that you do not understand? So you have chosen to challenge our claim to this world. The future is bleak and
I decided to go forward instead of turn around and go into the portal, so the next thing we're going to do here is go into the Abyss chapter, which is an optional chapter. And of course, the visual theme is oceanic, which I guess is appropriate that we're going from one surrealist imagery to another of a totally different theme. There is kind of an elaborate puzzle here, and it's one, I think the last one that's not very intuitive, which is that you have to color the constellation in such a way that no two nearby stars, no two connected stars are the same color. And we have 3 different options, and the book that you have in front of that puzzle describes pretty much what you have to do through a bit of narrative. This is a reference to the 3 coloring problem in graph theory, by the way. Clearly.
We've tried everything. It's been days and she still does not wake.
I'm not going to give up on her. Hermina has cursed her because she is afraid. I'm not going to handle her so easily.
Her fate is with the gods now. None but the divine can defy a Daedric prince.
No. We merely need one's blessing. Out of my way, Varian. This is the only way to save my sister.
It is precisely because she is your sister that I should protect you from yourself.
Fool! It is because she possesses a gift. The very reason why Hermina has damned her to eternal nightmare. Don't you understand her gift? Her power could mean the end of nightmares.
And you're going to fix us how exactly? By slaughtering the townsfolk and making you act with a different Daedric prince?
The sacrifice must be made.
You leave me no choice. I cannot believe I once called you friend.
Cannot be so foolish. You are damning her. I contribute to you, Molad Ball. I demand your presence. What is this? Who are you? An agent of Cold Harbor?
I am nothing.
Is this not the shrine?
You are not in your reality. On the contrary, you have called unto us. We answered to the last breath leaving your dying body.
Then after that, there's a much more intuitive puzzle, which is the magic puzzle, where you have to match the magic you cast with the tablet. So, for example, if it has a destruction spell symbol, you have to use destruction magic on it, and so on and so forth. And you don't have to hit the tablet for every thing. You just have to use a spell that is matching the spell category. Relatively intuitive stuff. Then after that, there's a mini boss, basically. I guess it's just a boss, but it's really a mini boss, where you either have to hit him with range attacks a number of times, or find 3 runes that are scattered across the map and activate it to banish the boss. So there are 2 attacks here. The first is that if you get close enough, he'll use lightning bolts, which you don't want to do because those are basically instant. And then otherwise it's explosive magic. This is basically another, and clearly anti-melee because you have to use ranged non-stop. And it's good then that there are a bunch of spell tomes around so you can get free range attacks, I guess. So there are 3 or 4 ads also that spawn, but it's not infinitely spawning either, so it's not a big deal. You don't even have to kill them. Pretty simple boss, basically a mini boss. Along the way, which I didn't mention, is that you get these tokens which you can use to craft special armor and weapons at a forge, and different tokens will reveal different armor and weapons to you in the list when you go to the rare category, which I will have shown because I'm doing some of these with magic build and other with stamina build that have basically there's different ones you can get. Although I don't have a 2-hander because that is my character with a 2-hand build has a ton of mods on it, so that's not gonna happen. But I don't think it matters that much. Because the one-hand swords I think are pretty OP, and daggers and all that stuff. So generally, I would say like they're all pretty good weapons to have. Although, you know, if you have, there are some mods obviously like they're just silly weapon mods where it's like everything's OP just for fun, I guess. But we're not doing that. We're not shooting throughout. Which, by the way, I realized that like a lot of the, what would you call them, gameplay overhaul mods are kind of goofy because it's just a lot of settings being configured slightly differently, a lot of tuning that doesn't really lead anywhere. One of the biggest overhaul mods that I forgot the name of. I played it and then I played the vanilla. I realized it doesn't really make things more challenging or interesting. It just changes the settings to make
You misunderstand.
certain spells hit harder, certain spells not hit harder, certain everybody is like beefier, but it didn't really change the dynamics of it, even though a lot of it's like it was played up to be a real overhaul, and it's not. None of those things are overhauls. But whatever. So
Unless
I'm
you're
gonna do these
committed
videos
to
per quest slash chapter in the main quest chain, meaning that the length will probably vary.
You shall learn the way of my power, and we shall carry out our work together.
What's happening? Enough of this.
Accept your fate.